much time do we have, Ken?
You know, an hour and 2 minutes.
Okay. I think we can get it.
Make it solidly into the rebuttals.
Maybe we should just start at the rebuttals. Not good.
Are we all set? Yeah.
Yeah, we're.
Okay. Sweet. Alright. Plan! The United States government should ban the use of heavy fuel oil in the United States waters. Has been issued with the advantage one is the Arctic. Absence of Arctic regulations ensures a wave of species extinction in 2016. The Arctic includes the world's richest marine resources, fisheries, marine mammals, and densely populated seabird nesting. Commercial shipping is accelerated by the extreme risk to the environment. The polar quotas are critical for its achievement of coastal tigers. Some of the most dangerous threats highlight the need for preventive preventions. Number one need is to ban heavy fuel oil. The Arctic Council identifies fuel as a great official threat to Arctic marine resources because it does not evaporate. Heavy oil will be virtually impossible to clean up. Rise coast should also regulate black carbon. We need to ensure that this week's accomplishment is only the beginning of a more comprehensive scheme. The impact is total ecosystem collapse. Leibniz and 16. One of the climate-specific critical transformations, the advent of shipping and Arctic water stations, race for immediate need for rules to safeguard the region's incredibly fragile environment. Some of the world's highest value fisheries rely on Arctic water. Ship traffic will dramatically increase in emissions, including black carbon, known to accelerate ice melt. Shipping straight is a catastrophic spill of oil. Heavy oil, thicker than lighter grades, does not evaporate. Spill response is virtually non-existent. Including buffers are really stable. Spill can lead to ecosystem collapse. There is no need for further info. Extensive evidence has already been sufficiently brought forward. Calling to ban offers leaders a unique opportunity to pressure environment, make significant contributions to contributing climate change. Cleanup and prevention strategies are insufficient. Only the plan eliminates the risk to ecosystems. Grossman and 14, given the unique sensitivity of the Arctic responding to a spill poses greater challenges than those faced elsewhere at the end. AS describes enormous logistical difficulties of a spill response. The legacy of Valdez and the shell rig that when adrift are reminders that accidents do happen, that communities rely on wildlife competent spill response impacts. We are woefully unprepared for disaster. Hiron suggests a ban on heavy fuel oils. This would lessen the risk of catastrophic spills and is a measure being considered. Some training sessions have been held as the NAS report acknowledges little is yet on place in the ground. If a spill occurs today, it would be mayhem. The HFO oil spill is inevitable. Absent the ban, it obliterates Arctic species and overwhelms ecosystem resiliency. CSC and 16, significant risk reduction will be achieved if the ongoing oils of distillery rather than HFO. HFO spills are up to 50 times more toxic in Arctic marine ecosystems. Have low diversity. Many species have slow growth rates and infrequent reproductions. More dynamic and occur more quickly and with longer lasting effects in the more diverse ecosystems. The persistence of HFO leads to a myriad of impacts. Long-term effects include chronic exposure, all of which transmit impacts well beyond acute phase mortality. The environment poses a unique challenge to traffic, increases the possibility of an accident. The harsh environment and dearth of navigation elevate the risk and the statistical likelihood of a major spill. Even in ideal conditions, spill response is not difficult. It is difficult if not impossible. The properties of HFO make you limited possibility on more unlikely. All three commonly used methods are challenging with thicker oils like HF. Arctic environmental collapse independently causes extinction. WWF and 10 Arctic are important for biological diversity. The Arctic is the most important place on the face of the Earth. The Keystone species is whose removal triggers a cascade of changes affecting other species. Can be said of the Arctic in relation to the world with ocean currents. Arctic functions like a global thermostat. Disrupt these functions and we affect the conditions under which life has existed. The Arctic is a keystone ecosystem for the entire planet. Disruptions melt sea ice and thaws the tundra. The heat is absorbed by salt water that impacts ocean circulation beneath the tundra. Risks of methane escaping increases and consequences will be global. We are nudging the Arctic towards catastrophic consequences for all life on Earth. Losing the Arctic is not an option. The Arctic needs to be protected from threats that undermine its resiliency and hasten its demise. Advantage 2 is black carbon. Black carbon emissions from HFO use and shipping accelerates localized warming in the Arctic. It overwhelms reductions in other areas. Stricter on 15. The Arctic is unraveling. The annual mean surface temperatures increase by more than 2 degrees. Severe impacts from Arctic application directly affect lower latitudes. But BC emissions are of special concern. Particles not only absorb heat but also darken snow and ice, reducing albedo and spurring glacial ice melt and sea ice retreat. Opportunities exist in shipping to reduce emissions. Lack will not have hindered industry uptake of cleaner practices, and industries do not become mainstream. Their activity could counteract BC reductions in other sectors. The increase in commercial activity will lead to greater emissions, and BC emissions have a strong impact even over their short lifespan. This local impact translates to global climate change. By stimulating Arctic application, BC could almost give a 5-fold increase in surface temperature response. The shipping activity is already on the rise. A regional ban will help curb future emissions and protect the marine environment from spills. A small activity increase and have disproportionate impact. And several studies have observed up to 80% reduction in black carbon due to shifting from residual fuels to distillate fuels. The council worked to build HFO in BC and a number of working groups, but also volume has not yet translated into conclusive action. HFO regulation in Arctic shipping is key to solve black carbon emissions. Griffin and 14. The HFO creates carbon emissions, contributing to local warming and increasing the pace of the Arctic snow and ice melt. A ban on HFO use with a resulting switch to low sulfur could produce reductions in BC of up to 80%. Shipping traffic increases to a black carbon shipping represents an increasing local source of pollution. Arctic emissions of black carbon have been projected to increase up to more more than 3 times increased shipping, combined with declining black carbon from other sectors, could dramatically increase the relative importance of Arctic shipping emissions. The future ship traffic will be one of the most important sources of direct emissions into the Arctic. They may have had an even stronger regional impact without controls. Projected emissions could have a dramatic impact. Black carbon emissions from shipping in the Arctic are increasing and uniquely accelerate Arctic ice melt reductions have an immediate impact. Homer in 16, depending on the time and location, black carbon can be about 30 to 100 times more powerful than CO2. Black carbon from shipping has a unique impact on the Arctic. When small dark particles settle, they accelerate. The dark particles settle, they accelerate as melting without policies. Emissions may result in up to 120% more CO2 and black carbon. The good news is that BC leaves the atmosphere after only a few days. Actively reducing black carbon now immediately results in lower levels in the atmosphere. Hopefully it won't take PBR another 4 years to overcome policies that the Arctic may not be able to wait for much longer. Shipping emissions control is vital to slow Arctic warming. Proximate reduction ensures mitigation relative to other sources. There's and 13, a report estimates that increases in black carbon from about 50% from the shipping in the Arctic by 2030, but there's a way out of this dilemma. Technologies exist to treat exhaust gas from ships to help remove sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter such as black carbon. Decreasing BC from in Arctic shipping will result in a 60% decrease in forcing benefiting the Arctic. These technologies and fuel use practices can become elements of emission control area for the Arctic. The release and deposition of black carbon in the Arctic region is of particular concern because of the fact of reducing albedo. Mitigating Arctic sources will have a greater Arctic impact than the size alone would indicate. Left unregulated, these impacts will have adverse consequences. Shipping should be required to adhere to the same responsible measures. Arctic shipping regulations are sufficient to mitigate the impacts of Arctic warming as it allows us to avoid catastrophic shifts in weather patterns. As are in 14, it seems an opportunity to talk briefly about the sea ice and why decline should motivate us to limit shipping and to limit ship emissions of black carbon. Arctic is warming at twice the global average. Winter has focused attention on the role that ice plays in influencing global weather patterns and cyclical cooling drives global ocean circulations. Warm water moves north as it cools. Latitudes becomes very dense. A key component of massive amounts of ice and cells salt, increasing the density of water, causing it to sink. The circulation is one of the key influences on the climate. Pulls warmer water north, and most models predict significant weakening of this formulation. It would say results in extended cooling in the North Atlantic because waters would cease to flow north. Effective methods of mitigation exist and could be readily implemented. Fuel switching, scrubbers, particulate filters, and side valves can provide reductions. Black carbon is a significant source that we know how to mitigate immediately and whose reduction would produce special benefits. It causes extinction to couple. 15, global warming can shut down the circulation of the ocean, stopping vast reaches of agents to disposing the whole northern hemisphere to severe ice. This change would be sudden and sharp enough to royal civilization. Department is also supported by the National Science Foundation and published in the Journal of Nature. Communication Atlantic through circulation could stop the Greenland's ice sheet now flooding the ocean with fresh water. This might seem small, but even minute changes in the average are a signal of extreme swings in actual conditions. Effects would be felt in a matter of years. In global warming can trigger a cooling trend. Authors envisions a significant drop in the human carrying capacity of the Earth. The ocean circulatory system would drop much of Asia into a famine-inducing drought. They concluded the existing models may have underestimated the sensitivity of the ocean system. Even a relatively small change in the ocean salinity corresponds to a significant temperature decrease. The U.S. leadership is essential to global limits on HFO, calcium, and 15. The soon-to-be finalized polar code does not go nearly far enough. The U.S. can offer effective leadership has the ability to keep the scales on HFO used to having a fuel tank rupture would have dire consequences for wildlife. Switching fuels to a cleaner distillate would reduce the emissions considerably. The U.S. has tremendous opportunity to push for greater ship reduction. A primary objective about to be limiting the use of HFO in the Arctic. The goal is absolutely achievable as the U.S. steers the Council. Should keep in mind that much remains to be done. A vehicle for enhanced measures exists, although it needs a strong, steady hand, vision, and will. The U.S. must demonstrate political will to ban HFOs. It prompts global action. Here in 16, phase out the heavy fuel oils and urgent challenge to be readily addressed and reduce the top price. And the Arctic environmentalist rules are set by the IMO, where the U.S. has strong leadership. Any action taken for this meeting will go a long way towards setting in motion the necessary discussion and rulemaking by the IMO that would extend beyond this administration. Result of legacy production from the Arctic heavy fuel oil. The Arctic environment is remote, fragile, and severe, prohibiting heavy fuel oil, producing a number of significant benefits. The Obama can create a legacy of a safer Arctic leadership, but the U.S. would likely find ways to support for other nations as well. U.S. regulations to limit HFOs in the Arctic shipping spurs regional agreements, which unused it solves risks to ecosystem and warming. Prior in 16, the Arctic Council has taken no action to advise the shipping to curtail its use and switch to cleaner fuels. The effect of cleaning up is impossible. The problem is more acute in the Arctic because of lower species diversity. Blending the use of HFO in the Arctic will reduce black carbon. If efforts to decrease short-lived climate forces can complement the initiatives to ratchet down carbon emissions. The black carbon emissions are becoming significant with retreating ice due to climate facilitating efforts to expand trade and conducting tourism and mitigation. Diesel engine sources offers the most confidence in reducing the near-term climate forcing. Focus on ship source black carbon ought to be a priority with concentrated action under U.S. leadership that could be achieved at the IMO in a relatively short amount of time and framework for action is how you address black carbon. This emission ought to be remedied. Forced biodiversity collapse is a unique risk. It overcomes adaptive capacity. Bronski and swab the ecological systems are known to shift abruptly in the irreversible from members to another when they are forced across critical threshold. The global ecosystem can react in the same way. It's a question of planetary scale. Critical transition as a result of human influence. The possibility of planetary scale tipping point highlights the need to address how humans are forcing biological change in at least 4 of the 5 big 5 mass extinctions, all can coincide with global scale forcing, so which initiated a lower level state changes that controls do not override global scale forcing mechanisms, stay human growth, resource consumption, habitat transformation, energy. All exceed the forcing evident in the most recent state shift. Direct local forcings have accumulated to indirect global forcing that exceeds the last transition when 30% of the Earth's surface went from being covered by glacial ice to being free. Observable responses include dead zones, replacement of 40% of the Earth's right over land areas, and extinction rates far exceed background. Removal of keystone species worldwide. Models forecast that pressure number will continue to increase. The possibility of a future planetary state shift seems high. Biotic effects included many extinctions, puzzle to substantial losses of ecosystem services required to sustain the human population. Weapon, social and western loss of human rights could result. I think it's Oscar.
Just like make it. Alright, you ready?
Yeah.
Why do light fuel spills not trigger the impacts to the first advantage?
We read evidence that says that light fuel is, 1, less likely to spill, 2, it can be cleaned up more effectively.
Do you have evidence that cleanup measures are being prepared now?
Well, we read evidence that there already is the capacity to clean up
Well, the
light
capacity,
fuel better.
but the will?
Well, yeah, when oil spills happen, people try to clean them up.
Okay. How does the plan stop... I have no idea what I wrote, sorry. Next question. What authority does the United States have to protect the Arctic? Wait, I forgot. How does the plan stop oil drilling?
There's a ban that's been imposed on it in the Arctic.
Okay, but the WWF card indicates that...
That was written in 2010 before drilling was banned in the Arctic by the
Okay,
US.
is that banned by all nations of the Arctic Council?
It's banned by all nations of the Arctic Council?
Well, U.S. drilling is banned. Our argument is that there's kind of
what authority does the
regulatory
U.S. have to protect the Arctic, given that it destroyed it?
What do you mean by authority?
Well, your card says we have an obligation to protect the Arctic. That's WWF. What authority do we have?
I mean, I'm just
do that
looking for
obligation?
clarification on what you mean by authority.
All right,
What kind of
never mind. Next advantage.
Okay.
How can the U.S. make other actors respond through norm diffusion?
We've made an argument about how other actors are already looking to the U.S. and watching their action vis-a-vis the environment in the Arctic.
Okay, so who are these actors?
So, members of the Arctic Council.
Who is in the Arctic Council?
There are a lot of countries in the Arctic Council.
Can you tell us?
Can you give us a conclusive list of the countries?
Russia, Canada, the Scandinavian countries. I'm not sure which of the other
So the
North
final
American
card,
countries are involved.
the final card in this contention says that the plan would lead to a regional agreement protecting the environment that the Arctic Council would ratify.
Mhm.
What would be included in this agreement? What's a likely version of it?
So I'm not sure that the card says it would lead to like a new legal agreement. It says
That's
that
exactly what it says. It says that there would be a intergovernmental framework for regional environmental protection. What would be included?
well related to HFOs. I don't know
Okay.
that it
No, the
necessarily-
spillover claim there is that it starts a negotiation on environmental protection.
No,
Just tell me, even if it's just about HFOs, just tell me what it would include.
It would
Well,
certainly include HFOs.
Yeah. The prior evidence is about how there should be a coalition around banning HFOs in the Arctic. That's what we think it would include.
Okay, so do you have evidence that says other countries want to coalesce around that issue? It seems that the card says
We've
they're
read
like
evidence-
looking to the U.S. to move first.
Yeah, so
Why are they
a couple of
interested in
things.
doing it?
One is kind of this legal question you're asking about. There already is like an Arctic Council which cooperates over things like environmental initiatives, which means these structures already exist and leadership has like an empirical effect on how other countries operate. Second is I would point you to the card above that, which I believe is Heron, and says that other countries are
So
waiting on U.S.
there's no
action.
strengthening of the legal mechanism after the plan.
Well, it depends what you mean by strengthening. Like it operates
That's
within a
true.
pre-existing
It does.
mechanism.
It's just one off.
It's right there. Yeah, I mean, not much time to go into the recorders.
While you're pulling it up, I have to use the bathroom.
Wait, before you go. Okay, no.
This chair's too high. I can't get it.
I'm glad I wanted to be around. I said, if they lose, I'll be glad they're not here. So I'll say that.
exposing me. I'm not even in the bathroom.
Last round, he made fun of you for disappearing for Ontological reasons.
Maybe we could have a member of our live studio audience read the one and see. Who's the fastest person in the room? It's you, Jonas?
Oh, it's obviously Dan. It's like not even close.
Have you seen Jonas read?
No, Dan's slow.
Woo!
Everyone good? The one he attempts to reform liberalism through solving ecological problems through governmental action. This re-entrenches Western conception of man that sanctions mass colonial violence, anti-black environmental dualism, makes solving ecological issues impossible for nature. In 16 environmental studies, framing reform of the colonial European notions of political accepts and liberal form Western philosophy for the idea of Western man as much as humanity securing Western man's at odds with securing human species. Environmental studies that set itself to our present order can never alleviate struggles by uncritically relying on legislative reform. Scholars reinforce the very system that claim to be fighting divisions of space and bridge and notions of the human subject are invention frameworks through which global warming can be addressed. We must address the problem of setting subjectivity, traditional environmental ethics, and abstraction of human bodies from the past environment, ecological ethics that retains potential for objectification, preposterous and new environmental politics cannot come as a result of liberal reform, black inclusivity within extant mainstream political discourse, but only after understandings of human subject shaping, scrutinized, restructured, new politics could render present world unrecognizable. In Arctic, multilateralism cooperation represents a settler colonial operation that promoters violence, lynchroth. In 13 Arctic Council has responded to written colonial practice and exclusion of indigenous peoples by according to the political space. Arctic Council simply smooth the way towards political cooperation, Dublin ecological inclusion, exclusion prevails, inclusion entails their exclusion. Indigenous peoples not the one setting the rules that perceive important elements of real validation of certain elements features of indigeneity, while ignoring others as means of neutralization, suppression, or as tool engaging in national politics as means to emphasize certain appearances. The exclusive inclusion continues the colonial patterns according to the current liberal government appropriates indigenous forms of government since the pursuit of better government. These colonial patterns continue in sporadic, uneven, subterranean ways are deeply historical processes. And the one you see is crisis management. They point toward violence in terms of this global regime without pointing towards the violent crisis that constitutes foundation. Colonial racial capitalism undergirds the one you see, advocacy legitimizes the future world that murders countless bodies in the name of the preservation of the few. Cast into if you want to understand the system makes significant changes, not just major symptoms. You must look away from the immediate crisis towards the eco-crisis that's at work, even when the system is functioning well. The crisis comes to the system itself. The system cannot function as internal crisis. Crisis not what happens good wrong, but when it goes right, capital is not still the system that has always been one that cannot suspend its fundamental rule of propagation and expansion under any circumstances that cannot sustain, cannot suspend gender inequality, imperial violence, ecological destruction, psychological suffering. The equality built to capitalism is not due not simply to the pursuit of profit, but to the simply natural control of capitalists over work and labor's power. Crisis means we can suspend our usual rules and ethical standards because we must act now. The bombs have been launched there, suspended overhead. We can think about ecological prediction that forecast the end of natural resources. There's a looping of time in the future. It's spelled out in advance. The system cannot be reformed. The ocean cleaned, the corruption expunged, and the new chronic mode system maintaining the system commercially managing its constitutive crisis rather than confronting the system, the body, the plan, the capitalism's own death. And the affirmative requires the papering over of fundamental ontological differences between sovereignty and indigeneity. Their theory of political ecology and motors to the colonial violence. Campaign 14. Announcing political ontology would better underscore that the incomprehension between indigenous people and their colonizers management of the environment represents the performance of a different ontological assumptions about what constitutes nature. These are an active situation involving asymmetrical relations of power. Indigenous people have generally been compelled to adhere to the ontological framings of colonial state, ensuring from these different ontological framings the way of knowing these natures, the ends that people ascribe to them, are critical for understanding the account of indigenous people instead of colonial state construction of nature are once political and politicized. The laws governing actions have been essentially determined by the state and reflect social rights that are upheld by state institutions. These come to conflict with the factual rights of indigenous people generally has been under-recognized characterized by the junction inherent concept of equal pluralism and the expansion of settler colonial sovereignties based on ontological securing of life as infinite futures progression desire against the shifting signifier backwards deathly savages to be eliminated. This sanctions all violence, shot, and 16 no securities, no future. The institution of sovereignty secures for the physical preservation by bringing temporarily self-existent producing a future. The sovereign is the very meaning conscious of life, self-preserve life, but to demarcate life as life is differentiated from that sovereignty, both clear distinction between war, peace, and war. These pairs suggest a deep implication of the categories of life and death. The conversation concludes to solve the problem of desire, the approach of the future is built into its very structure. Desire seeks perpetuity of enjoyment. Human beings want to preserve what we have forever. We are made of the present requires accumulation, untaken approach, reference to an unknown future. In underlying logic of direct desire explains both preemptive warfare, and self-defense, and exchange of ground, future temporality, unquestioned philosophical foundation of the U.S. order, temporalization of desire explains the colonial foundation of survival. This failure of futurism can be understood as the dynamic content of conflict questions civil societies as the original civilization's imposition of temporality. What desire may push forward to counterrate that settlement, the possibility of fulfilling futures and fantastical promises requires some other way of meeting the need of manufacturing other societies, so to any number of structure forms of managing futurism, failing from transfer to outright extermination to war, mass starvation, and disease, narrativization, and gender centered beholden to an unsustainable temporality must be set in order to continue to produce meaning, survival, civilization, native is death, must exist in order to purchase life and settle the data kind, existence, values, to indigenize yourself, into production, new enemies, new queers, new death, that's to settlement. Do you want me to read Wolf and Lloyd?
No.
And genocidal settlement is not a one-off event, but a structuring, ontological, logical illumination, constantly manifested in the everyday reiteration of the very modes of spatial inhabitants that define settler identity. Rifkin and 14 attempts to get our settler colonies that shift tension from its factors implications for non-native political attachments, forms of inhabitants, modes of being, tracked, inspiration, operation, settlement, as system invasion, structure, non-event, logical elimination, drive settler sociality elimination, is an organizing principle of settler colonial societies rather than a one-off occurrence in native or continuous to structure settler colonial society, non-ontological level structures of direction of possession, occurs to possession one, will to be on the thing which was to lack, will thus is open to being possessed, possession forms an ontological structure of white subjectivity, colonization, racialization, often manipulated ways that misdirect of the underlying structure of settler colonialism, and ideas of Indianness serves the ontological ground which is settler colonialism, and acts as vote negative to endorse the cartography of refusal day, and 15, this now political legitimizing the legislation to receive recognition for the one refusal to be recognized as interpreted by settler colonial nations, say I don't know more than sovereignty, sovereignty movement, Canada's natural railway, and how we blockade have seriously destabilized the expropriation of natural resources for the global market. These are direct action blockades seek to impede or flow block flow of resources currently being transported into international markets from facilities located in the dispossessed land of indigenous nations. These modes of direct action seek to have negative impact on the economic infrastructure that's core to colonial accumulation of capital and settler political economies like Canada's. These tactics are part of a cartography or refuse then against the authority of the other's gaze. The responsible frame the blockade movement as a struggle for enfranchisement and with the more on conflict with the Canadian nation state is a struggle against the very premise of settler colonial capitalism. Environmental education creates colonial violence. The focus on particular unjust acts produces a limited understanding of racialization that precludes understanding a broader set of colonial foundations of Clean 13. Environmental education that includes historic colonial violence or political analysis of instruction, environmental policies, environmental education are drawn from a Western framework and disregard indigenous issues globally. Environmental education programs curriculum within a post-racial context where sustainability is supposed to panacea for industrialism, all solving industry, relationship to colonization, destructive elements of contemporary globalization, resources, genocide, disregard for life, notions, race, and all trace lineage back to the invasion by Europeans. Many environmental education programs center college in a frame that focus on the effects of environmental destruction, which politicizes and doubts colonialism. Environmental education focus on the effects of particular discriminatory acts on communities. Called this frame conveys limited understanding of racialization, failing to analyze environmental justice has been co-constructed through a state of relationships between spaces that have been racialized. Environmental destruction. Education can become a place where good white people can maintain superiority, and their focus on this state is demobilizes effective political resistance. Polito in 16 the states deeply invested in solving environmental racism. It would be too costly and disruptive to industry in the state self-state development initiative, which should go through the motion to perform regulatory activity without meaningful change. The problem is not a lack of skill, but a lack of political will that must be attributed to racial capitalism. Legal impunity explains the state's refusal to implement initiative to maintain racial capitalism. Capitalism does not have to address environmental injustice because it knows there will be a minor, if any, sanctions. Bureaucrats seek to avoid the anger of conservatives by not enforcing the law. We need to change how we view the state. Far too often the state is seen as neutral. Even when people lose faith in the state, they turn to it because there's no apparent alternative. EJ has become too implicated in the state. What's needed is to begin to see the state as absurd that must be confronted. Environmental racism will not be solved by research and the reform frameworks established by the EPA. And settlement is an everyday process constituted not only by the initial clearing of the land, but the ideological reiteration of the spatial, geopolitical, and self-evidence, spatial self-evidence of the terrain on which political struggle itself occurs. Disorientation is a necessary strategy. Rifkin in 13. If orientation is making familiar with the extension of the bodies into space and disorientation occurs and that extension fails, the critical project appears to us locating in space and which discover the fullness of self, then making alienarity by occupying place as if we should not recognize it, becoming conscious of everyday actions to self-involve relation to the notion of autonomous actual political self instead of opening out to recognition not only during the present but of the effects history of that provide the continuing condition of responsibility for themselves absent of the declared commitments does not suggest non-native exoneration, nor continuing histories of violence, absence of malice or declaration of support does not address who is continuing experience of space and subjectivity after the register and breaks of sovereignty with the shapes generation political projects cannot take native lands that are direct objects of common sense, ordinary actions, aims, non such produce, effective freedom to self-evidence, geopolitics, and spills are a result of neoliberal expansion into the Arctic and explicit governmental approval. Violations don't get enforced. Cleanup of past spills, specifically from Shell, is impossible, which makes the impact inevitable, and lobbying ensures regulations get watered down. Canada is also an all-cause Greenpeace and 11. The Arctic is home to 4 million people, many of whom are descendants of indigenous communities. Arctic sea ice melting and the alarming great summer line creeping industrialization as companies and governments scramble for the region's natural resources alongside the logical line of operating in such an hostile and remote region. Oil rigs facing ever-present risks from huge icebergs and exploit fleets of ships to drag them out of the way. Despite these incredible risks, companies continue to recklessly lobby governments to relax Arctic drilling safety rules. Exxon vowed that 2 decades later, the region is still suffering from the after effects of local populations of otters being severely harmed. But oil yet to recover and spilled oil rigs on land. The oil industry has demonstrated time and time again that it's not simply not prepared to deal with the risk of oil drilling in the Arctic. There's really no solution or method today that we're aware of that can actually recover spilled oil from the Arctic and shell clay to conclude 95% currents. Oil spill response plans and oil as oil spill expert. Center of wholly inadequate so-called solution to our Atlantic and realistic shells. Spill response plan for an accident that Chucky Sea was recently approved by the U.S. government. This document is supposed to explain that what Shell will do to block a ruptured well and save the Arctic region from ecological catastrophe, but even a quick reach of the company would be entirely unable to respond to an accident. The high north and far more likely negligence plans and spill down, and the means and justification for technocratic management of land directly overrides indigenous epistemologies and politics in the valid form of eco-colonialism. Yakavella in 15, the most vulnerable regions lack the economic instruments to deal with climate change. Colonialism persists today. Colonialism premised on exploitation of resources and global trade, forced urbanization, displacement, global trade led to forced urbanization, displacement, deforestation, soil erosion, territories, where left to such hydrogen bomb experiments cause fast damage to island ecosystem, colonial experimentation, underpins current climate change discourse, form of eco-colonialism, contrary to mainstream narratives that perceive states as monstrous societies, are justified complex in the global north, considered global areas for colonial policies, environmental laws form produced almost exclusively to Western scientists, marginalizes other approaches generating knowledge. Is that generating knowledge?
So the second to last card is this piece of Greenpeace evidence, and it kind of talks about why Shell does bad stuff in the Arctic. I guess my question is, how does the alternative respond to those types of corporations?
So the cartography of refusal would enable strategies of negotiation that aren't based in recognition. For example, idle no more blockades the expropriation of oil, blockades shipping ways that have seriously impacted the Canadian oil economy.
So my next question then is, what about the AF necessitates a strategy of recognition?
Well, multiple arguments. First, the link arguments about multilateral cooperation in the Arctic. Our evidence says necessitates a form of government that inherently sustains settler colonialism and excludes indigenous people. Our evidence makes the connection to the recognition argument because it says...
for a second, because I understand that you have some link evidence and link arguments that are about kind of the advantage areas of the AF, but my question is more about the mechanism that the AF employs, which is that the USFG should not.
Well, if your argument is that the plan leads to international Arctic cooperation, that impact turns the plan too. The recognition thing, I can connect back to that.
So do you think that the alts, how would the alts respond to HFO use in the Arctic? Can the alts
well, it would be consistent with Inuit movements that are doing things like stopping the flow of oil before it even gets to the Arctic in the first place.
Okay, is international cooperation always bad?
It is under the terms of sovereignty.
Does the alt abandon international cooperation?
The alternative does not endorse it. What do you mean abandons it? The alternative never started with it, so it's not there to abandon.
So how does the alternative approach international cooperation?
The alternative seeks the end of the nation state, the sovereign as coherent entity.
Okay, so the alternative seeks to get rid of corporations drilling in the Arctic. How does it deal with international backlash from that type of direct action protest?
International backlash to who? Argument, or international backlash by who and against who? We'll read evidence that says that indigenous movements are unifying globally now. And so the question of backlash is more of a question of seizing power from the people who
would backlash. So I guess my next question is, it seems like you've read some impacts that are about kind of the way that international coalitions exist writ large. How can the alternative kind of create a significant movement to dissipate those international institutions as they exist and cause problems?
I think we already answered this question. The alternative moves against forms of governance rooted in sovereignty.
I understand that you've read this 3-line day card that says that we can have some sort of refusal and we can initiate these individual protests. But my question is, what those direct action movements can do to change the way, say, the Arctic
They seize power from coalitions and assert an authority by destroying the economic infrastructure, by destroying the economic and physical infrastructure by which those companies things like Ecotouch, Blockades, things we've already explained.
So blowing up pipelines.
Those are things that indigenous movements are doing now.
Okay, and you think that can do something break down the Arctic Council?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. We'll start. put for alts, like,
It's
okay.
yeah.
Are you good?
Yeah.
I have 145 use, does that sound right?
Have you set it up?
Okay, I'm gonna talk about the case a little bit first, and then the critique. Okay, is everyone good? All right.
The case there are two conceded impacts that turn the case. The first is about biodiversity. Our evidence indicates that that spills in the Arctic massively increase the risk of biological species and the biological species extinction. It specifically impacts resources supplies, which turns their impact because it recreates the same sorts of resource inequality that determine colonial capitalism. The second impact is about global warming. The melting of the ice sheets creates the condition for the sorts of resource securitization conflicts their evidence criticizes, and it leads to a larger form of the larger extinction based off of the ability of the ocean to properly contain oxygen, which outweighs their impacts, which is Cardinal Reed on the okay. Go there now. Scenario analysis bridges the gap between research and policy and forces self-reflexive thinking, and is the best antidote to biases in decision-making. The role of the ballot should be to evaluate the enactment of that scenario of the plan. Barmadol and 15 scholars diagnose the gap between academia and policy making enhanced communications. Only one can push bring the between the gap of the crucial components of substantive research patterns that are policy relevant challenges, or especially future students struggling with little attention to pay the techniques of determining policy relevant ideas, the elements of problem, the base research approach to developing a research program using scenario analysis to focus on pedagogical benefits of this technique. Scenario analysis seen as a core of the scene and sort of corresponding yet it is not limited to those uses of your characterized analysis, juxtaposing trends and unexpected combinations to articulate futures. If you're referred to as alternative scenarios explicitly after later extrapolations, or should they be used as simulation setting or future statements narrative, and calls for forces several features make scenario analysis use of the ability to measure little and prepare for discontinuity, disconstraint. This is exacerbated by the group thinking confirmation positive powers scenarios loss in their ability to help break out of conventional modes of thinking, introducing trends and discontinuities, matching future roles, enables policymakers to envision adapt to something altogether different characteristics, make it will they'll make it suited to helping political scientists generate research paradigms that's marked out, and that's marked out research paradigms permutation to the app, and endorse a cartography of refusal. A kind of framing issue for a lot of their case-specific link arguments is that those are largely determined by current practices, that the alternative of simply endorsing direct action is not able to directly solve, and if it is, it obviously overcomes the epistemic commitments of the plan. View the app as weak ontology. We can constantly question ontological frames while affirming pragmatism in specific instances. Simon and 16. A pragmatic approach rejects the idea that foundational truth rather than being anti-foundationalist. Pragmatic approach to be context dependent provisional. Any ontological claim is always be open to interrogation as less to engage in contingent realities, make reconstruction possible even from ourselves, contingent fundamental claims of necessary politics, down faith activities, comparative with continuous reevaluation helps us move beyond deconstruction because it's generally plural scenarios that there is no one correct approach to critique. We can send and focus on something because we're given what we know about context when we direct with ethical claims, and every settle must be constantly rethought conclusions over the temporary resting places. We can stress possibilities to remain sensitive to limitations. We need to overcome the view that we should practice freedom from the standpoint that transcends power of the ideal situation, just that there are practices of resistance. Their Arctic K card is about attempting to do the policy for Native people and a lack of access in international discussions. Both of those things are not reinforced by the affirmative, but they can be remedied by changing the view we have of ecological disputes in the Arctic. That's reason 16. Environmental change is backdrop against which understandings of Arctic security are set. The connection between security and the environment must be very conceived to engage with ecological sustainability. Critical Arctic security must embrace the ecological maxim that everything is connected to everything else, and understand that both the state and community, individual decision play and rendering themselves secure and insecure ecological stability in the context thinking critically requires policy actions that contribute to environmental sustainability. We might imagine Arctic which extractive industries that irreparably damage ecologies through point source pollution are replaced by economic activities that support the priorities of inhabitants. One way to start would be to heed security claims by indigenous people towards a conception of Arctic security that supports human communities where the natural systems on which they depend, environmental engagement in the Arctic must be channeled through political and legal frameworks in this instance that complements the voices of disenfranchised communities and also holds governments accountable young and 13. Nowhere is a chance of adapting to the impacts of climate origin. The Arctic coastal communities can find what they need to relocate to avoid physical destruction. Nowhere the threats of the species ecosystem part of the increase access to the region more attractive for global economic players and so with the commercial shipping and production of materials essential to cooperate the operation of advanced economies in multi-latitudes volume is likely to triple by 2020 by the sea. It's close to the welfare of the northern peoples in the Arctic. This is not the primary concern of corporate decision makers. Not all externally driven challenges in the Arctic produce negative impacts to social welfare or ecological integrity. Prevailing legal and political practice allows to identify specific parties who can and should be expected to take steps to avoid those developments. There is an important distinction between harms regarded as actual through political practice and harms treated as bad luck. It should not be one thing to say we protect the bowhead for wells and carbon because they are essential to the welfare of indigenous peoples. Not to say that the harms are actual because we have an obligation to maintain our consistent biocentric. There is much to be said for an aspirational terms for the shorter we are in need of a persuasive anthroposophic argument that can provide the rationale for protecting citizen ecological systems in the Arctic. Their card is marked at Arctic. Their model of critique is overgeneralized form of understanding that doesn't contribute anything to a critique of ontological security politics. It's more important to develop context-specific understandings and that reconstruct political narratives we stop 13. A weak ontological approach to and tendencies to a true foundational assumptions are articulated today. Method which also engage with complex questions used in case examination for critical analysis about contextually situated theorization response to particular cases creates opportunities to engage with financial ontologism required to cope with ethical problems of security, but in ways that can help us avoid verifying or essentializing any particular security infrastructure that's market infrastructure. Their cast in evidence for affirming collective survival in the face of capitalism is not life denying, and then it also doesn't create response to mind. Cornell and Sealy 16 is unclear how without any collective survival of might address crisis. We refuse the force of supply the way you must either choose to save life or struggle against capitalism. The stewards have accepted alien or we insist on both life and anti-capitalism. This is precisely the position taken by climate scientists who are explicitly linking climate politics to counter capitalism and the research into climatological catastrophe fantasies. There was the idea that collective human action can transform the situation better than vision is possible, but perhaps we ought to try before means that sure that ephemeral is the best left for us. We owe to those who do not need academics to defend themselves to the Arrogant founders bear the least responsibility for the destruction of how they now face most imminently. That card is marked at most imminently. Their impact is about liberal outside opposition to say historical and wrong. Touching 11, the thesis of continued relation between liberalism and the defiance of the straight line from World War I to the war and terror. The attempt to read the history of 20th century relations in terms of successful competition between monarchy and criminalized society, unable to comprehend the complexities and specificities of liberal world ordering objections caveat to the application of liberal humanity and some liberal forces apply to the recent period. How can this explain the liberal West coexisted with a large number of client regimes where the war activity made magnified West systems of emergence which constitute secondary strategic interest to political stability, even in more obvious cases in Afghanistan and Iraq. The intervention has been against the not bringing liberal projects of series of votes that seem to rely on the denial of their antecedent history that contested state building projects. The card is marked at projects. Their ontological settlerism arguments are gone by evidence about an incomprehension between indigenous people and colonizers. The act does not compel indigenous populations to adhere to false universals. Their critique of norms, there's no system of norms that's perfect, but the alt certainly can't interrupt sovereign international logic. Question 10. Sovereignties come to provide the dominant logic for the organized political left despite behavior consistent with basic principles and expectations organized. Hypocrisy is not new to characterize the sovereign state. Sovereign state system. There is no one set of rules that will create equilibrium, but what is surprising is the durability of decoupling every major political treaty and non-stated principles inconsistent with the effective sovereign or society. Inconsistency. The alternative has arisen. Sovereignty syndrome because divisions can be accommodated by divisions for the world to change. The actors not to support some alternative when the U.S. moved from recognizing Taiwan to Beijing. They established a place that diplomatic arrangement for Taiwan and the Caribbean was that their range is not perfectly sustainable, but Taiwan has achieved sovereignty. Their direct action does not solve and actually re-entrenches repression when used on a large scale. Taiwan 13. Even if resistance wanted to disrupt the system significantly, not only with systems rules rebuild, recent has shown that they would increase their power to suppress resisting sectors. The more action resisting the intent to hurt people, the more the meaning the public focus on tactics, and rather than that means that the most radical tactics tend to be targeted productive to the goal and increasing awareness and the concern in the general public. Authorities whose tactics that are voluntary can be framed as such justified to the public. Large flying infiltration, disruption, even violence against those movements of suppression typically succeeds and eviscerating resistance of this. We're not devastating enough to the resistance border and radical environmental campaigns that we're not using the radical tactics and strategies radically in the wake of those rights given the history makes little sense to use base strategy and tactics such as unlikely possibility that communities of resistance will ever be able to mount a sustained campaign building to bring down industrial civilization, even if that were desirable objective. Their Western education remains possible to understand situated understandings of climate science and operationalize those against bad scripts. What Martian 11 there is to converge from the work around engagement with climate and the work about learning about climate there is that those demonstrate that individual and institutional dimensions of federal has with the eternal sense situated become individual play. Knowledge we can identify with three current dimensions, decision making and knowledge skills and judgment behavior and broader engagement with the governance, lobbying, voting, protesting, covering capacities not defined by narrow individual standards solely knowledge that the concept applies and understand the limits of individual action where they encounter wider social institutions, the individual system mediated through socially shaped lifestyle, social clothing, intensive practice that are eliminated by social systems, individual choice of shape and shaped by wider social institutions, shift away from seeing scientific literacy, abstract facts towards investing in a contextual meaning of science outlined every day. Let this definition of scientific literacy includes an understanding of dynamic processes, knowledge, and structure rather than science as a codified stable body of knowledge. It's marked as stable body of knowledge. There pretty low evidence. It's possible to use demands on the state to radicalize environmental justice justice movements against colonialism. Foster in 17.1. Way advocates might choose to reconcile the sense of the destructive conceptual scientific role of vulnerability. Vulnerability is concerned with social inequality, exposure to hazards, vulnerability as analysis of potential provide conceptual and practical links between equity terms and environmental regulation may speak to regulators to use a thing and quantitative way to deploy it as a tool for environmental justice advocates to quantitatively capture the factors that render communities so vulnerable to disproportionate exposure to pollution. The card is marked, no, that card is marked as pollution. It's possible to use one-off state engagement and alter critique settlers and subversity in 14 Wolf claims that the boundaries of our shared historical potential gambling civil society stand, and since repudiation may be complicit with the civil logic of elimination, only boundaries is not a tree that one either must idealize or work at a narrow way of attention to origin. It's a false choice of recognition, not necessarily on our position with the Eurocentric critical attitudes and critical attitude is not necessarily frankly conspiratory to assimilate to compete with the project. The question is whether by dethroning the principle from its conceptual and affective primacy, the logic of elimination remain uninterrupted. Boundaries and boundaries one dialectical state will take the attitude to say Francis saying that I cannot be configured that's worked to configure their oil drilling card. Drilling is banned now. It's also a justification for exactly what the app seeks to do. Finally, their land management critique is definitely not about the app because we do not justify countries going after resources.
Are you good?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to start with the scenario analysis card. This card says the challenge of bridging the gap are especially acute for graduate students in a field that is admirable devotion to pedagogical self-reflection. We need to generate policy relevant ideas for dissertation and other research topics. Other numerous articles and conference workshops are devoted to the importance of experiential and problem-based learning. What is the relationship between you two and all of those things?
So our argument is that kind of using scenarios in a debate space is kind of unique because we're able to play those out in an argumentative setting
so what
that allows us
are paying
as
attention to the 1EC's research?
well, so I don't think policymakers are in this room paying attention to research,
this
but
card
that
says
model
that
of contestation,
graduate student dissertations,
yeah,
etc., policymakers pay attention to
that model of contestation leads people to develop policy-relevant research paradigms that we think are effective in doing things. We also read this piece of
people go and publish papers and then get listened to. Okay,
right. So our argument is that debate motivates that process in the context of the environment.
Okay, let's talk about the piece of evidence that you read about weak ontology. What is a weak ontology?
A weak ontology is the idea that you can kind of make a contingent claim about how the world works or should work in one instance and kind of remain open to renegotiation of that claim as it's applied in different contexts.
Okay, great. So the Cornell evidence that you read, so it says that the part you highlight says we insist on both life and an end to capitalism, and then it talks about the importance of hope. The part you don't highlight says the cause for hope is resistance, a certain set of dynamics that does not fit within capitalist culture, including environmental direct action, resistance taken from outside the dominant culture, as in protests, blockades, and sabotage by indigenous peoples, workers, anarchists, and other activist groups.
I think this is a piece of permutation evidence that says you do not need to pick either resistance to capitalism or ideals of collective survival.
Alternative demonstrates a way when you can save lives, save life, and resist capitalism. How does it say that the app is that?
I think this makes an argument about how you can affirm collective survival and an end to capitalism. Our argument is that strategies of political contestation and direct action are not exclusive.
Okay, well, so this piece of evidence also says that the basis for hope mobilizes politics in an effective way. So why doesn't this take out all of your indites to direct action?
Well, we read an indite to direct action being effective. I'm not sure why hope motivating it
defended
means...
it as effective.
Well, this card doesn't say it's effective. It says it's examples of hope being operationalized. I'm not sure why that means it's effective.
Okay, that's fine. The piece of evidence that you read that talks about indigenous security, it says that ecologies are replaced with economic activities that support priorities of Arctic inhabitants and themselves. Such alternative possibilities are imagined in the understanding of security to identify referent objects such as their communities, indigenous culture and identity, political and cultural autonomy, and the integrity of human natural systems. How do you solve the majority of those things?
So our argument is that the app is able to reconceive of how Arctic security works based on the concept of ecological openness and connectedness.
Alright, I sent it. It's the K, starting on the framework unit.
Take a second, Chris.
For real?
Trust me. Trust me. You just take a second.
Do you have water?
No, I don't.
I'm just gonna go find a sip of water. My throat's pretty dry. Alright, thank you. I do. Okay. Everybody ready? Yep, great. The purpose of your ballot is to guide students in forming themselves as ethical subjects. If we win, that settlement is an ontological relation that structures our identity, our understanding of how politics works, what things we are allowed to do on this land, which means that it is a determining factor in whether or not the affirmative project can be endorsed as ethical in the first place. The conceded two-link arguments that are to their very framework of how politics works. The first is our Fraser evidence reformism, enforces settlerist conception of the political subject that disallows indigenous participation. Who is allowed to speak in the Arctic Council of the United States federal government, the spaces of law that happens in the affirmatives politics. The terminus of their environmental protection can only ever be the reification of settler stewardship and power that makes their impacts inevitable through a separation from land and disavowal of indigenous endurances. McLean evidence is the second link argument about environmental curriculum. It says that it needs to be criticized not from the focus on particular ecological dangers, but the larger question of a colonial history that makes possible the articulation of reform. Settlement itself is a form of environmental devastation by clearing forests and forcing migration and land use changes. This means that there is no solution to the affirmative's larger impacts without challenging the authority of the state, and their claim to set the terms of debate is the colonization of political reality that proves our link argument. Brunel 15, I include politics itself and other facts of settler colonists and colonists. The settler colonists substance seeking to bound one is legitimately subject for debate and contestation before one can even ask the question is rendered moot outside the bounds of legitimate or realistic politics. Response to the state of the state to hold up responsibility for more radical transformation of the political world. This is a difficult framework to ponder the appropriate one for decolonizing and settling politics in which to sit on clear lines against settler colonialism, appropriate violence, fundamental to active the 21st century political development and status of America. They say scenario planning good. No reason this is offense against the alternative. We imagine a scenario in which sovereignty is overthrown. They have no argument for why they spill up to more effective policymaking, but we're going to make some pretty sick movements arcs later. Also, this assumes the inevitable futurity of the state because it frames our political agency through the role of policymakers, which you should put into question in the first place. They say Arctic K doesn't apply. Oh, yeah, the permutation. Needy's going to impact turn this a lot, but I'm going to extend a bunch of link arguments because they have not dealt with them accurately. The Arctic Council card says that there's a form of dual inclusion and exclusion that assimilates native politics and relations to the environment while disavowing the radical claims of their demand for land recognition. This means that it is an erasure of their epistemic approach to the environment. This is an impact that cannot be calculated within their material frame of consequentialism because it is a spiritual and cultural erasure. This means that their claim to support the indigenous is a form of violence that is a classic tactic of legitimizing Arctic multilateralism. Lindroth 13, the call for indigenous agency is unquestioned. However, it needs to be problematized as indigenous peoples are accorded political status in the Arctic Council. These political spaces set requirements for indigenous people to govern their own adaptation, granted the role of stakeholders, binding the rule formulated within co-management, and set expectation to implementing indigenous people still govern through the guise of participation and power is a practice of biopower. Now, you say it's inevitable. This is itself a link. It presumes that the nation is the only thing that can garner authority over the Arctic, and also you say that you reconstitute legitimacy through new environmental agreements. Our argument is that this will be used as a tool of protection and regulation that determines how indigenous people can relate to their environments. This is our environmental management link to Giacovella. Evidence says that the strong ontology of colonialism is forced onto indigenous people in a form of political application of sovereignty, which occludes their ability to resist the state. This means even if they win a theoretical argument about weak ontology, none of it is in the context of settlerism and how that politics is operationalized in a material form of oppression. This means that the land can be valued economically because it is cleared of other ways of life or modes of inhabitants. This makes it disposable at a certain price through economic regulations that allow for spills to be approved and shifting to other countries with less regulation. That's our Greenpeace evidence. They are never going to be able to win that the sovereign cannot legally maneuver outside of regulations to allow new forms of drilling and other forms of fuel, especially in the era of Trump. This means that, they say law holds the government accountable, not if I win any of those circumvention arguments, but even if it's true, it disavows the embodiment of settlement. Our Rifkin evidence indicates that bodies, ships, and technologies of economic extraction themselves are instruments of the sovereignty, which means that as long as they continue shipping with other fuels, you are maintaining authority over the land. Obligation to maintain the environment leads to a violent form of protection politics that regulates the indigenous peoples that do not conform with the Western scientific understanding of of how to be with the environment. They say survival is good. The shot in evidence is way fucking better than this card. It says life and death are not neutral categories, but generated by the sovereign in order to get us out of the state of nature, to secure a futurity for us that is stable and predictable. This is only possible through the elimination of the deathly exception to the rule of law constituted by the category of the savage. It shifts throughout time from the Indian Wars to the War on Terror and causes a constant need for economic adjustment, elimination, and violence. Results in a form of interventionism and structural violence that massively outweighs the affirmative, and it's not responded to by their liberalism good card, because all of our cards are about settler societies, which can be very, very illiberal. But also, these cards don't answer the Kasdan link argument. It's a crisis focus that always necessitates the occlusion of a history of incalculable violence that makes possible the systems that result in forms of catastrophe. Their focus on particular harms necessarily overlooks the infrastructure of the world that makes possible anything like a solution to a particular threat to indigenous communities who do not even get to claim the status of community in the first place. All of their arguments about the remedial nature of these conflicts is itself a disavowal of the antagonistic nature of the settlement relation. They say that the decay of norms doesn't apply. We never read this. It's about the authority of governance institutions in the first place. Insofar as this card just says that it's inevitable, it's a form of colonizing political reality, which you should reject because it's going to make movements impossible. They say direct action fails. Let's do the alternative debate. Our day evidence indicates that refusal is a strategy that denies the authority of the settler to determine environmental politics and the direction of sustainability. The settler is not just the state, it is all of the debaters participating in this round, which means we should deny the authority of our ability to determine reconciliation and recognition in favor of an absolute blockade of the economic and psychological instruments of extraction that deny indigenous authority to inhabit their own land. This means attacking the corporation directly, as well as attacking the self as our disorientation alternative. The Rifkin evidence says that making space alien to us is a prerequisite to positive interaction with environmental justice movements because it prevents violent assimilation and incorporation based on the naturalness of our own authority to speak, and allows us to focus on the ongoing presence of indigenous movements and their environmental justice research agenda that always views the state as an adversary because of its sovereign claim over the land itself. Movements are coalescing in the status quo to stop Arctic pollution in a much larger sense than Georgetown's affirmative by actually challenging drilling, the authority of corporations in the first place, not just a single fucking fuel. Bicket 15, government have permission to drill is fueling something powerful while governments refuse to rein in companies. Ordinary people are stepping up. A movement is growing across borders. Activists forming human blockade. Shell's rig is met by protest after protest. Indigenous people join firmly in opposition. Drilling is not something people are willing to accept. Over 7 million people believe in a better future and are ready to fight. This is happening across the globe and is the only chance to preserve indigenous ways of life while also generating true sustainability outside of the hegemony of the settler. Collard 15, the Anthropocene's let's fire, light a fire. There's a time to dream about abundant futures. Decolonizing frameworks built from scholarship and movements premised on indigenous self-determination, violence, and settler colonialism is ongoing. Transform these conditions require political structure around the decolonization to create conditions for abundance to recall violence essential to understanding and intervention today is linked to process of imperial ruination. We pay attention to history of abundance and the violence and led to determination. We ally ourselves with Ethiopian advocates for farmers' rights, refusing capitalist enclosure of land via Compensina and 200,000 members defending peasant farmers against land grabs and creating institutions, alliances, on borders created by the future, be supporting already existing world of practice. Zapatistas applies engaging in activism wherever one leaves decolonization sets out to change the order of the world. Unsettlings are already taking place pluralistically. Our best chance for abundant sociological futures. They say we're not committed to the West. It's not about that. It's about an ontology of settlement that presumes authority over land. This card says you need to consider carbon in a situated context. If we win, settlement structures political identity. This is a neg card. They say state advocacy good. Vulnerability can be theorized outside the law, so we solve the only warrant that Ezra actually got to in his reading, but they also have no evidence about the role of advocacy that is specific to colonized populations. That means they assume a neutrality of negotiation in the terms of power and allows for a pick-and-choose politics that tokenizes particular indigenous groups that are willing to work with the law at the expense of those who have an alternative understanding of sustainability. And they say no state link doesn't include settlerism. You marked this card before it said shit, so we'll answer it later.
Okay. So your answer to kind of like sovereign structure is inevitable is just that statement is colonizing. How is the alternative, even if 7 million people agree on a better future, able to change sovereign legal structures?
Okay, so we have a thesis claim that sovereignty is not only about legal machinations. It becomes embodied in the presence of the settler in particular spaces.
Sure.
Challenging sovereignty does not require an overthrow of the state or a highly visible revolution. It is disrupted in a speech act that interrupts the normalcy.
Let me ask you this. Why clearly there is some sort of like material element to sovereignty that exists, even independent of settler embodied space in the form of something like a authority agreement over a piece of land, for example. Now, presumably the alternative would want to address that in some way. How does a speech act approach that?
Two things. One, disorientation leads to more effective collaboration with movements that challenge the sovereign. Two, our evidence makes a sequencing question that I don't think you answered, that subjectivity and settler authority at the individual level structures the legitimacy of the state.
How do those movements challenge these legal structures in question?
Blockades.
So why do blockades change the division of authority over land?
It's because they refuse to negotiate with the state to provide a more just policy and instead assert the literal occupancy of land by bodies, which means that it is a bodily assertion that we are here, we have a right to be here, and the state does not have the authority to say otherwise.
And states have responded how? They usually respond by trying to reassert that authority.
I agree, yes. Our argument is that the affirmative is a performative iteration of that same authority over the Arctic.
I guess also, what piece of evidence do you think that says it's sufficient simply to just embody land?
Well, first, if I win impact framing arguments, it's ethically necessary.
Okay,
Two. So the
stuff,
sufficiency question is best answered, I think, by the Collard evidence, which says that the abundance of indigenous ecosystems and worlds is something that continues to exist. To say that it is already dead, that there is no chance for challenging the state, is an evisceration of grassroots agency against the continuing encroachment of corporate land grabs.
This card talks about things such as Ethiopian advocates for farmers' rights and refusing capitalist enclosure over land. I don't think it's talking about this sort of embodied politics. It seems to be talking
unsettling
about...
is already taking place pluriversally.
Okay, but I'm just confused as to how that model works. Sure, unsettling is occurring. It seems as though it's occurring in a multitude of different ways, some of which are very similar to the act.
Oh, that's where we really disagree. I don't think that's anything like that.
It's just the perm / the weak ontology argument.
Are you all okay? All right.
The Tweetsies made a host of arguments about weak ontology and pluralism. This is a model of politics that they have to be stuck to. Independent of the rest of the case, the weak ontology arguments are a reason they should lose the debate. 1. Global violence. Growing radical ideologies require a strong ontological position and critique over affirmation. Their embrace of weak ontology ensures that politics collapse altogether. The worst atrocities seen in 5-year narratives are pervasive. The stakes are high engagement with market fundamentals shape the 21st century. Safety fascism made this 120. Some theories of elaborate ontologies that issue fundamentals urgent accessibility to weak ontology. It's wrong concept turns acceptance and affirmation and structured hope for equality, demand, and more critical political response approaches find common ground to best theories that opposites well other political entity makes some congenial at a moment when they need to be sharpened as antagonists as possible ever critique avoid the risky work of condemnation, division, dissentally rejecting market fundamentals regarding history, turns the person to benefit the few while the majority are rendered criminal. Disposal of weak ontology steps on cultivation of the competition with lovely notion rather than setting out a critique of white reassurance liberals, white assumes consensus no longer exists the right. It's just forming the state neoliberal economics to replace social solidarity with brutal inequality, violence, and control. We should not defend modernity practices when I find those fundamentals directly welcome cultivate tolerance and towards positions that are wrong. Why can see grounds with opponents when the stakes are so very, very high. White displays radicalism which would necessitate strong claims in affirming theoretical friendship among different constituencies. T-point politics and Fullerton hovering is indicated the larger problem of avoidance of brutally arranged world versus brutally arranged world plus ethical dilemmas or deniers of consequences, though we don't shoot the norms through which you must change with those norms, the first responsibility and ethics and call into question these norms for the consequences itself and ethical, capable, and responsive as unresponsive to this relations of power condemnations. My ethical responsibility, I need not base the condemnation on a sense of my knowledge is more certain. Failure to condemn main risks of power as well as condemnation of complicity rather than responsive ethics to politics, avoidance of politics, avoidance want to, but responsibility for decisions, condemnation that exceed the aims and intentions of the acting politics and necessitates necessarily entails risking actions where not every value should be tolerated. one should be willing to and able to give an account of these decisions. Just one should be willing and able to condemn and oppose what should be condemned and opposed. Condemned and opposed. 2, post-politics and focus on consensus and bridging together disparate strategies. Ignores the ecological order, requires radical positions of opposition. Swing into infinity despite the consensual attention, sustainable eco technologies, global ecological conditions, deterrent, and alarming great. We continue to act if we do not know environmental degradation, gallops, and combined, not even apocalypse. That when the ship goes down, the first passage drown is manifestly untrue. Punching organization, accelerates possible combined, not even ecological apocalypse, sustained by post-democratic forms of central government that do not tolerate radical dissent, consensually established concerns and nurture political reactionary stance, technological and techno-nuclear planning, displays ideological, consensual contestation, struggles, administration, the governance, and then got to replace potential debate and agonistic encounter, debate and contentious argument are restricted to question of techno material management and intervention enables the formation of certain post-ecological establishments while closing down other violence described in such choice as to be fully acknowledged what kind of simultaneously a truly carbon neutral city and permit unlimited carbon motility. They are mutually exclusive any foreign policy making to a certain degree oligarchy. It fits those who better maintaining the current trajectory gradually against those who configured and inclusively operating production of socio-ecological urban commons while the political democratic politics on different disagreement concrete spatial ecological interventions essentially about rails of closure definitive choice and certain exclusion target expectation for acting on side with the kind policy worthy of the same oppositions requires a process that keeps the coal in its hole. This requires the nurturing of processes that enable the production of space and democratic opposition acts in frontier. This oppositional positions between enemies become articulated and organized oppositional encounter. 3, passive nihilism. This recreates a state of consensus based on post-politics that not only destroys the creation of individual value in debate, but fuels endless cycles of violence. Deichen in 11 analysis the world as it is not as it ought to be. The passive nihilism expresses itself in the ability to take up an antagonistic element of politics and emptying out of the political politics of the gameplay without possibility of changing the game. Passive nihilism consists of the possibility of putting a distance to the actual reality by taking space over objects considered impossible. Politics appears radical questioning the what becomes impossible. Politics involves the argument critique of reality. Post-politics signifies the forced culture. Politics post-democratic expression of antagonism does not make post-politics a peaceful order. Post-politics brings paradox of balance of society, bent on neutralizing instead rooting on all radicalism, lack of antagonism, to counter with acts of antagonism and self-destruction will do nothing as today's ideological arena looks like a battleground between non-antagonistic politics and the ultra antagonistic fundamentalism, the cancelling out of difference, the analysis of principal power, excellence, post-politics and solid difference upon terror exists. In order to hide the post-politics itself is terroristic and fear, the victim goes berserk and kills even more people than terrorists and so on. Historical erasure. This is no more than a symptom of the death of history and an attempt to reestablish one's power in an epoch of seeming randomness. Moving ontology is the ultimate form of transcendence that sanctions global violence. Croker in 14. Not predestination of the world seems to be precisely the opposite of death of history, coherent patterns, clashing narratives, expose the truth and narrative itself is only it should affect the power of the eclipse intelligibility because for all history there will be great blood to focus on that which has always been previously marginalized as unintentionally excluded, disavowed. Narratives are processes content fully mediated local societies, narratives of war, and found catastrophe unprovide the question of who and what's not to rise in the sphere of physical recognition has always been a cynical production of a gembonic power, the boundaries of moral intelligibility to define whose life may be rightfully grieved, the one's liberty from identically prescribed narratives, one's unburdened of the federal social and national liberty history, is free to materialize the secret dreams of some illusion epochal, dialogue between Athens, Rome, Jerusalem, concerning the proper functions of the human will, and found which history was precisely by way of the gift of death, the sign of the transcendent could finally radiate most brilliantly 5 settler innocence. The argument provides the means for Georgetown to maintain a politics of innocence via settlement, so assuming the unstated parts of the one he can simply be reincorporated in Corey and Scott Murray and 15 we see the unconscious space of repression, what the term settler signifies for knowledge, which the production settler holds a very specific function with intensified project context in North America, examination of the aspects of investment, self-understand the unconscious bonds settlers have to natural discourse, colonial unconscious produce a settler mythical subject free of the disruptive foreign and activities that obscures and filtrates memory, producing settlers innocent in desire for democracy, fullness, opportunity, shame, and guilt to defer any debt to our workers to provide a theoretical framework to analyze analysis under such a global culture of knowledge. Settler must believe that history is the past, that any and all harm, traumas, and accountability is no contemporary actuality. The fact that the lands have been the home of indigenous people is of only historical interest and then to time has passed. 6 is spatio-temporal dispossession. The very idea of ontology itself to produce the aesthetic colonialism. The idea of a weak ontology ignores an ontology demarcated by spatio-temporal violence. Rosenberg and 14. Ontology's history is in many ways crystallized in legal form that remain with us still in the affect of economic, political dimension, racialization, aesthetic colonialism, relationship being in havoc. Ontology animates modern theories of citizenship and law. Ontology cannot be thought outside the spatial dispossession, nor can it be thought outside the temporal character. Settler expropriation that Scientific deploys indeed weaponized temporalities forms speculation. The spatio-temporal type of dispossession sits into place of property form and racial ontology that once at the heart of the ontological evolution that course through our social worlds at the heart as well as the form of primitive accumulation that set in place the same form the description of citizenship, the figural annihilation in space by time, the origin narrative, one that gets viewed in the ontological term brings together the temporal accelerations of financialization, the speculative settler form, and speculation at the form possession and ritualized possession that brings together a mark of contemporary moment of primitive accumulation. They can't kick this argument because it's in the 2AC, and it presents a model of how they thought the debate should go down. Cross the 2AC, they re-explain that that's how you should interpret the app, which means that they're stuck with all of this.
thing for each author, so that's good.
Yeah.
I will be the cards I'm reading. You good on cards?
Yes.
Alright, is there anything you want to talk about in particular?
So I think you should definitely read this card.
Okay. Where?
Wherever he made the like erasure from the international dialogue agreement.
Okay.
And I think you have to read this card.
Okay.
This is also good.
Yeah, that's good.
And then I think it might be good to read more. I'll get this up, but I think it's good to read more of this 2AC separately.
Okay, well you can give it to me
Yeah.
at the end if I have time. Is there anything I can about?
Just make an argument. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say that.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Anything else? What does that mean?
That's the crescent card.
What? The what?
Crescent card.
I don't know. You're not speaking English right now. Which one?
That one. It's
I'm sorry?
yeah, all things are
You told me to wink at you.
Alright, now are you good?
yeah.
so it's going to be the case, and then I'm going to do the weak ontology impact turn first, and then the rest of the K. But I'm going to do the alts first there. So, case, weak ontology, alts, 2 in C order.
Here's one sec. So alt stuff.
And then should mostly.
Where is
So
just dropped and wrote
the 1 in R, then the alts, then the 2 in C in order.
the alt. That's like where the direct action bit is.
Yeah, what?
Right. Okay. Got it.
One in our alt.
Is
Case one in our. Case one in our alt.
Yeah.
we're almost.
So we got it across in the first place.
Alright. Everyone's set? Great. The AFRI conceptualizes our relationship to the RJ based on openness. It sets within generate effective environmental agreement and holds the US accountable for privileging corporations that destroy the environment with HMOs, even if the AF works within harmful institutions, i.e. the Arctic Council. The conceded case demonstrates its necessary and contingent circumstance. The impact outweighs and turns the odds. Consequences matter. Slow violence, death, etc. are all things that we agree are objectively bad, but it's a question of whether or not we can effectively engage institutions to create incremental change. Things like reassertion of sovereignty because of resource conflicts, land grabs, and powerful corporations are only reasserted in the world of environmental destruction, and they've conceded that things like biodiversity collapse and black carbon warming both cause extinction, which means it's not possible to actualize the alt if they reject institutions holistically, because there's always this question of when can we become ethical. There's a difference between an absolutist understanding how the world operates and antagonistic positions. We disagree with the first. Every conceded case argument is a dissent to their totalizing view of the world. This weak ontology business, to win this offense, they have to win there are particular forms of weak ontology or bad, i.e. it's all incredibly question-begging. Link the scorched earth critique fails. Attempts to tear down totalizing narratives aren't good enough. Scorch and 15, the world's going to have the scorched earth critique of every aspect of rationality through tension. To engage in such a critique is itself parasitic upon the democratic vision, never snatching position, critical to better arbor quality and justice. Even one rejects enlightenment metaphysics. Democratic norms developed by political practice rather than abstract argument. Even among the most trained philosophers, there is no connection between the metaphysical commitments and their politics. The post-structural try to read off in epistemological politics of attempts, replacing enlightenment with narratives. The postmodern anti-meta narrative, such a purpose and idealist version of the effort with post-structural explicitly condemned. Marta condemned. This is the worst perspective for approaching the world. Strong ontological understanding makes it hard to contest any structure which is not the same thing as a strong antagonistic commitment. Mustafa and I hope to call attention to the nuances of the real understanding studies of literature and ultimately argue that the benefits of employing a modified approach to modification is necessary because there is an inclination to conflate epistemological commitment with ontological consistency, unsustainable reasoning, whereas the intimacy of competing conclusions turns into an unwillingness to make any claims at all. This is not meant to detract from the core intentions of post-structuralist ethics, which seeks to interrogate and deconstruct the very meaning of security. Deconstruction is only the first step. It's Richard observe that discourse is discourse with the operations and schemes are real. This reflection is an important corrective against the straw figure postmodernist who becomes a nihilist trapped in discourse, willing to engage in status quo and our allegedly inherent ability to make truth claims. Their gene evidence begs the question of whether institutions in modernity, the work framework is an impact turns and demonstrates capacity to engage. Our sweat issue evidence is about the choices that are physically mutually exclusive, which is different than the perm. Our argument isn't that we shouldn't oppose the government, but that we can work within it in the interim, which means it's possible to recognize different strategies. Featherstone in 13th issue has argued that commentaries being constructed in post-political issue, there are important attempts to see. While there are key attempts to depoliticize to argue there are only ways to attempt politics being articulated, so Joshua review tends to ignore the ways in which conversation exists as held under determined attempts to contain the nation. Shall be cautions against the problematic globalization. This argument suggests the importance of allowing the hospitals under counter to shape the form of debate. Margin debate. Their dinky evidence says rejecting antagonism is bad, but that's not our argument. This card goes out because it proves we should focus on things that actually contradict. Their Croker evidence has no link to our ontological position and how we view history. The alt demonstrates this really well because they can also challenge the state. The Corey evidence isn't settled or innocence when they haven't proved a link, which I'll get to below. And the Rosenberg evidence is just an FYI about how ontology operates. The alt, it does nothing. Violent resistance movements always struck down with powerful institutions they criticize. They can't solve the magnitude of the impact. Because it's about institutions at large. That's Taylor. Read this through their impacts that emphasize the structural strength of institutions. They can't change the structures over sovereignty. That's our Kasner evidence. The AF isn't recognition. It's just a realization that we can challenge the state from within, which is the best way to do so in the interim. Their card from 2015 about how movements are growing doesn't prove they're successful. Both of their cards are incoherent optimism and don't demonstrate a causal link between the AF and tearing down things like corporate interests, which are only strengthened like things by the case. Making solvency arguments isn't erasing the alts. Otherwise, we could never contradict anything they said, which is just a tautology. They link to their Fraser evidence because there's some good end goal of the AF that's still reformism. Even if that's true, they never lead to any change because they have to wait for institutions to disappear. We can think about individual instances of environmental degradation without being tied to violence. There's no link to set the terms of debate because we haven't excluded their alt framework. Evaluate the AF. The relevancy matters. Consider us as ethical subjects and arbitrarily and endlessly begs the question of the link clash to education matter. Okay, so knowledge and skills to challenge contingent conclusions. Specific points of contradiction are necessary for expected engagement. That's our Barma evidence and equitable debate necessitates AF relevancy. Arbitrarily operating large persons of the act disguises and exiting value systems and ignores consequences which are equally unethical. That was the case. Permutation, do the act, endorse the cartography of refusal. All of their links are true to the status quo, but if the alt overcomes, then it overcomes the act. Two arguments. One is they operate on different levels. One is a broad ontological understanding that can be endorsed individually, but the other is a normative statement about what the USFG should do, i.e. a possible end goal of the alt. Two is the perm can overcome imperfect ontology. The act can be a weak ontological commitment, which was all that other shit are Nyman, Matsura evidence substantiate all those arguments that I said on the impact or any reason why they solved the case to be a voting issue with floating pig, prove the permutation, debate the question of whether direct action links the Arctic link. There's no dual exclusion inclusion in the Arctic. We should think about environmental disaster in the Arctic because it's intertwined with their impact. It's grief. It doesn't erase anything because Orwanity doesn't commit us to a broader empirical stance. Or Lindroth evidence is about saying we give indigenous people time to talk in the council. That's not the app. It's that we should stop environmental destruction as a result of U.S. corporations. Indigenous activists have gone to the IMO to call for exactly our policy. National News in 16 keep the Arctic climate cutting out shipping fuels as a message from the indigenous speakers from behind the fuel out of the Arctic. We urge the IMO to not illegally buying instrument and the use of HFO with the Ukrainian Arctic indigenous speakers from Russia. The U.S. and Canada hope to convince committees to consider a heavy fuel and oil limits, which proves that even if our reps aren't perfect, it's still a good conclusion. It's not our link evidence. Their inevitability argument is a reason why all of theirs are true of the status quo. We don't force anything onto indigenous people, and all of their opposition arguments are in the context of something other than the act. They don't have a coherent circumvention argument about our case because we create arguments about how it's possible to challenge the institutions and we get durable fiat. No link to continuous shipping. Ignoring the interim solution is worse because it just means we're ostriches who put our head in the sand and ignore the possibility of reform. That's framework. Their survival link. We can search for life and avoid catastrophe. That's Cornell. It's a false choice because one depends on the other and they operate in conjunction. The permutation solves crisis trade-off folk-off. That's a weak ontology debate. There are problems with institutions, but the act is a DA to reject them holistically. No norms are perfect, but the alt can't correct them. That's our cross-share evidence, which proves we can fix things in the interim. Even if Western education institutions are imperfect, we don't colonize anything because the alternative can't overcome it, which proves that the colonial institutions will always exist, and it's just a question of whether we can challenge the colonial consequences, which cause material impacts and turn all of their ethics arguments.
We got 9:54. Starting now.
This is exactly what we're saying. That's all. Oh yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
will be an overview, which is ranty enough that it might warrant a new sheet, if that's your thing. Then the K proper page, starting where Natalie did with the movement stuff. Then the weak ontology impact terms from the 1 and R. Then the case. If we have time. Everyone ready to start? Mishandling our framework argument gives you an independent negative ballot on ethics that does not have to even consider the consequences. The affirmative framework determines which impacts you prioritize and how you evaluate standards for solvency. We do not ignore the AF, but make an argument about how you should view it in terms of its pedagogy for ethical subject formation. This is the role of the teacher. It is the only thing debate can do, and it is the purpose of educational spaces because it is not about a particular role that we will play, i.e. policymaker or revolutionary, but a generation of knowledge that allows us to interact with our world in a way that is ethical. There's no fairness argument or theory claim in the 2AC. Now is too late. Any claims about arbitrariness are equally biased because they should not get to determine which arguments should be negative offense. Now, here's how you walk your way to a cow ballot through this argument alone. A, there is a strong ontology of settlement in terms of the political application on our identities as settlers. It determines the subconscious naturalness of our authority over space. Their authors cannot dispute this claim because they never speak to other indigenous ways of knowing, so they're fundamentally trapped in a settlerist echo chamber. This means that all political application is different than their theoretical speculation about weak ontology, and it is unethical for you to accept the inevitability of these institutions. B, they participate in settlement. The Arctic Council, stewardship, and sovereignty are a performative iteration of the authority of the law. Their notion of weak ontology itself is a disavowal of how ontological claims are structured by settlement logic, and their attempt to limit the terms of the debate to realistic or pragmatic effects is criticized by our Brunel evidence as a writing out of decolonizing strategies from the very beginning according to the authority of the settler. This means that they have a claim to help only through a ruse of legitimacy that requires a mystification of violent colonial histories. The link will always outweigh the link turn because these structure our identity of relation to political movements. The third component, this makes their impact inevitable. It locks in abuse of legal regulations according to an inherent settler sovereignty that presumes we know best because of the colonial epistemology that ignores indigenous endurance on the land. This allows for drilling, shifting to other countries with less regulations, and deregulation itself. It makes environmental exploitation inevitable through the separation from land and economic valuation that allows disposability. It's also a violent form of structural elimination of the native that is always shifting throughout history. It causes infinite forms of destruction like poverty, structural violence, homelessness, and war, which are all devastating to the environment and lock in inequality. That's our shot in evidence, which leads to the fourth component. They instantiate genocide that will a priori outweigh the risks of their impacts. It is a continuously ignored form of violence through a blackmail of specularization that poses a civilizational threat to demand that we secure the stability of the system. It ontologically structures us, which means that our very existence and presence comes to be violent. You can only ignore this based on the form of settler innocence that occludes the life worlds that are eliminated through this violence. They've conceded this is not calculable. It cannot happen in their materialist frame because it's spiritual and cultural. But even if they outweigh on probability, we will always outweigh on magnitude. The fifth is that only the alternative can solve. Refusal negates the authority of the settler to be ever ethical on the terms of their sovereignty alone, which forces a disorientation of our natural existence, looking towards the continuing native endurances and politics that can better solve the after movements while challenging genocidal disappearance as an independent impact. Even if we don't win movements, how we relate to politics as people is only solved by the negative. They have no argument about the importance of pretending to be a policymaker or a scenario planner. Now, the line by line movements work for reasons. A, they challenge the larger logic of environmental destruction, which means if we win any link or root cause arguments, it's try or die neg, because they lock in stewardship, which makes the crisis inevitable. B, it causes empowerment of native peoples, which asserts an intrinsically valuable form of sovereignty that disrupts colonization and inspires change. Their pessimism erases agency, which is unique offense because there are movements happening now which the affirmative attempts to shut down. The C is that they actually do disrupt economy through the blockades of corporations. They've conceded the idle no more example that even if it doesn't eliminate the sovereign state, it prevents the ability for companies to drill, extract, and transfer fossil fuels, which means that it impinges upon the shipping of heavy fuels. D is that it's more effective for us as students. It's how government regulations will actually happen. The reason why drilling was banned is because 7 million people put their bodies on the line, which means that only the alternative as a way to go from us to policy change. Now, the permutation, you cannot sever an ontology. It determines your politics and identity. And we have link arguments that are independent. One, Arctic regulation is a form of inclusion that's violent. Assimilation to pick and choose a tokenistic approach means that natives want the plan is a savior logic of innocence that naturalizes stewardship, which is inherently violent. Third, reformism instantiates a notion of the political subject that is settlerist. And third is that a focus on eco-crisis disavows the history of settlement as a system of environmental change. The weak ontology debate, this is enough to vote negative, but if we win it, it means a few things on the other flow. Perm is a non-starter. There are not two levels of analysis. There's only one. And third, there are no contingent solutions that can be delinked from the violence of their ontology. Their 1AR card only says it kills democracy, which is a form of political practice. We've won that political practice is genocidal. The next card is post-structuralism bad. We don't link to this. Dean says that their disavowal of responsibility through everything is connected through contingent things means there's never willingness to take a stance. Pluralism focuses on the common ground at a time where we need to draw antagonistic lines. This is impact is acceptance of atrocity. Dyke and evidence says they make the game neutral and inevitable to cause a passive nihilism. That means we never politically act, and pluralism forces externalization of violence against what it cannot include.
Yeah. This is what I said. Yeah, I mean, it was like a slightly shorter version of this, but the interpretation framework is what I read in the 1AR.
Yeah.
Right, that's on point.
I mean, it says that in the first sentence.
I definitely said this.
Right.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Okay. The case, and then I'm going to basically go in the order of the 2NR. The permutation is going to get plopped in there, probably closer to the top, and I'll make it clear when that happens.
Before or after the week ontology?
Before.
Okay.
Everyone good? Okay.
A conceded case outweighs their large structural link arguments that the alt is not sufficiently able to address. There are two impacts. The first is that biodiversity leads to extinction. That is based on a claim about resource inequality and resource conflict that reinforces a large majority of their alternative arguments. This is a conceded turns offense argument out of the way that resource conflicts reinforce sovereign structures, the way in which the opening up and melting of the Arctic allows states to intervene, and it reinforces the same sort of sovereign authority over land that is criticized, which turns their impact. The second argument is about global warming and sort of a larger structural death argument. They obviously think that being predisposed to disparate impact and death is bad. This is an argument about why that structure is able to be solved by the AF, which is a conceded argument and also something that subsumes their incalculable value to life argument, specifically because our evidence impact native populations being forced out of their land, which means it accesses their incalculability of culture argument. Now the K debate, the top at the framework, evaluate the scenario of the AF. The 1NR did make two arguments that Spurlock dropped in his infinite hubris. The first is that relevancy is good, not because of fairness, but because of the knowledge it allows us to address for contingent problems. That's substantiated by our Barna evidence, which talks about epistemic research communities that are focused on policy relevance. He didn't make any of the cool cross-ex arguments about not being sufficient to promote agency or change, but just said that ethics first. Ethics are just value judgments. Making a value judgment of the AF isn't sufficient to substantiate bad ethicality. All of their ethics arguments are linked to claims about why settler subjectivity is bad. How do you come to understand why settler subjectivity is bad? You come to understand it based on the way settler subjects act, which means that you need to link ethics to action, which means that framework should always be thought of in terms of the way the affirmative and negative politics is actualized, which is a reason to weigh the F. The second argument is that equitable debate is good. We won't go for it as an impact, but it's why their framework doesn't solve why the demand to be ethical does not produce better subjects on its own. The problem is that all their impacts are linked to worldly practices like the way that settler colonialism instantiated. Simply agreeing that ethics comes first does not establish how you respond to settler colonial violence as sovereign, make movements, etc. Even if we don't run framework, the case is a dissad to their ethics because it demonstrates that excluding institutional engagement recreates violence, which is a conceded case turns argument. He made an argument about being in an echo chamber. We are not trapped in an echo chamber. They have presented a narrative of how settlerism works. The distinction here is that settlerism, that their claim about settlerism is a strong ontological claim. The AF saying that the claims that we made are weak ontology does not negate the capability to be antagonistic towards settlerism.
It just disrupts the idea that we should adopt meta-narratives. The Schwartz evidence read in the 1AR, I think, is very good on this question. It says that it causes us to essentialize structures that makes it extremely hard to respond to. The settlerism card in the 2AC substantiates that in this context and says that it recreates a form of essentialist binarism that makes settler subjectivity so monolithic we can never do anything about it. Their Arctic settlerism link, there is no writing out of a strategy. There is no claim to help people. There is a claim to accountability, which was the argument we made on the permutation about changing the way that the government responds to people. I will do the permutation debate here. Permutation do the F and affirm the negatives cartography that overcomes the majority of their link claims. If embodying land epistemically and physically is enough to reverse the dominant strong logic they criticize, it's obviously possible to do that and affirm a policy that reduces Arctic shipping. Their best links rely on us not taking a completely oppositional stance to the way settlerism is practiced. The problem is their description of indigenous world making is not consistent with that, but great line for us from their color card is that it proposes the pluriverse as a heuristic proposition, a commitment to acting ontological multiplicity to shift us away from continuously performing the universe. It also describes a variety of different strategies that can be used contingently in different instances to go against the settler state, like Ethiopian rights movements or the Zapatistas. That proves it's not necessary to have a strong ontological understanding about how resistance should operate, and there are indigenous leaders who have also lobbied them IMO to do the F, which means that his racial link is non-unique, and clearly the indigenous community is not united in direct action as the only horizon, but it's part of a multiplicity of possible responses, and the contingent reading of the plan allows us to affirm that as a part of a broader vision. There's no abuse of regulations. This is inevitable because of the precepts of sovereignty, which is our crass and evidence, but it proves why it's important to engage institutional structures. We do not instantiate genocide. That was the argument about understanding settler subjectivity as completely determined. The F accesses the impact of that because of the cultural argument. The alternative is not able to solve. There's no explanation anywhere about why it's fucking sufficient. He reads a piece of evidence that says that 7 million people care, not that there is a causal link between that and blockades being effective. They have conceded the one piece of evidence we read to respond to that says it's never sufficient in radical ecological movements. It leads to repression and circumvention on the part of economic elites, which proves why the affirmative is uniquely important to prevent that. They made an empowerment argument. That was their link argument about why the F was bad, and it also is taken out by the uniqueness claim I made above. The F is not pessimism. It accepts a multiplicity of different movements. The blockades are bad because of the repression argument. I made that above. Now the Dean evidence. The Dean card is a critique about talking about the opposition, i.e. settlerism good within a strategy. The F obviously doesn't lead to gullible scholars who can't make value judgments about things like that. The first response to that we have is Scorcher's critique is bad. Those readings of history always essentialize practices and paper over contingent differences like break and the logic of sovereignty or colonialism, which the alt obviously needs to exploit. There's also a difference between ontology and action, and ontology is a reading of how the world works. Weak ontology says the entirety of subjectivity is probably not determined by settlerism, but you can still say an antagonistic strategy against fossil fuel plants is good based on the context of it over polluting government. Now his answer is the permutation. We do not sever an ontology. We never made a claim in the 1EC about how settlerism was constituted, and we can still analyze that. They made a savior logic argument, which I answered above with the uniqueness claim. They said reform leads to the settler subject. I've problematized that as well because it can be a part of a multiplicity of analyses, which is obviously commensurate with their alternative evidence. Then they said that the affirmative needs to be able to disavow the settler subject. This is kind of our perm-link double-bind argument. Obviously, if their form of epistemic embodiment is able to do that in totality, the permutation solves.
Good debate. Good debate. Good debate.
agree with this? I think between ours or I don't think that putting some of the things are exciting. But like I think
What makes that shape that you guys?
so like two things. One is I don't think that there's a on the economy such as society. It's going to be like this. Is that so? And the two else, right? There's kind of the big economy exists. All tests are because of structure. It's not very powerful for them, right? And that's like a major, education system stressful. So it's going for that. It's going for the rest in the world. Bringing everybody into the zone of death because it's over and it's supposed to be station. Those are the two biggest problems.
Wait, I'm sorry, I've been a little distracted because I need to send this thing. Just wait a moment, I have to go walk, and we'll walk it. Yeah, sure. Needy? Will that go third block or? Okay. I'm not seeing it. So the one I see, I don't think they usually record it. Did you send out a doc? Was I asked to do that? Yes, I know. Judges? Ken? Do you want a document of compiled cards or the speech docs enough? Alright. Are you good with the speech docs or do you want me to compile?
No, I'm not gonna need to see that many cards, I can pick them out.
Are you all good with the speech docs?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Do the speech docs, wait, the speech docs have marks?
There were no cards that were marked.
Okay.
I feel pretty confident about that. Yeah, no, I didn't mark any cards.
The thing I sent out has all of our.
Oh, wait, that's
You have
fine.
flavors. I think I have most of
I'll
the
send out the card that's marked.
Will, let's go talk. No. I'll read it quickly.
Like, this is the ship from perspective. That's replaced. It's long process. To give you an example of hot water was one of the
That works for
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
We need another timer. We need actually this. We've been working with one, which is fucking dangerous.
Okay, let me see if any of us have some. I think we should.
Can you already go?
Yeah.
Can you get him to get my jacket? He said he knew the person. He's got it in his hotel room. That's the claim. You should ask him to confirm, but that's what he's getting that figured out.
Yeah, for sure. I'll give you time on that.
This is great. This is a lot better.
Okay, that's actually pretty important. Right. No.
Dope. Great impact. Yoink.
This bird's really good. Right. My job for me.
Seriously. That's awesome.
Yeah, so I was very pleased. Very pleased.
Who's doing that? Mr. Still. How are you? Oh, well. You're already doing it.
I know. Everybody said everybody else is doing.
That's why I have to be there.
Screwed up. Okay, this is.
throw that?
They have water in them.
Oh, yeah, that's false. It will dry my mouth.
How do you speak fake food?
Who opened my almonds?
You're on.
You're all Why did you walk over the window?
Oh, no. Let's talk about
Reminds me about my ex-girlfriend who gave me drama.
You know what, man? Whatever the fuck's going on in your mind, that's your problem. You deal with it.
Thank you, I'm logging back in.
I have to log into, so, two things happen. One is that the entire stuff, so I log in. That's good. My phone was dead, so I log in.
I'm not listening to you. It's fun.
I know.
What happened happened. We are what we are. Mimi, this is shocking. Shocking.
The next one's like that too.
No, the second one was even more shocking.
Right.
I don't know. That's great news. Thank you.
It's really crazy.
I will not forget that. And I really
Although I will say this question is really interesting because a lot of times.
What did you think? Not
overly invested by the I just read.
Let's just not talk about that one. You have that one. Yes. And then the other one is
Chris Palmer.
Yeah, so, and I live in EC. And so you go with the set.
Hey, Jeff.
I'm worried
I didn't want to look. I was afraid I would make a hair about it.
Not too far gone.
I like this a lot. I don't think I cut this part. Okay, you said we can send you the. Okay. Alright. Good. Excuse me, I'm sorry. is. I'm gonna point away from you. And now you can go back to doing what you're doing.
Is the decision in? So I 5-minute warning. Decision is due at 7.
Okay, rolling. Is everybody relevant here? Yeah, okay. Congratulations everybody for a fantastic tournament. Second half of the coast. The decision is a 2-1 for the affirmative from Georgetown.
I was the one, and I will be very short because they don't care about me, and you're saying he's stupid anyway. I voted. I think there's an ethical question on the premise. I mean, certainly policy actions involved, but I think there's an ethical precursor to that. I mean, you know, you're saying start with the assumption genocide is good, and let's see if it pragmatically works. And I don't think that's what I should do. The other thing is I don't think they're foreclosing political action. I think they're addressing the question of how we take political action. And so in that sense, this knowledge question, you know, that first card is so, that's the most overclaimed, no, it's not overclaimed, it's overclaiming in the card, but it's really strong on that reformism buys into this paradigm, which you really don't defend except to say, you know, hey, it might work, or we could do other things, or whatever. So, yeah, and I can talk some more, but that's the essence of it.
I voted on the permutation. I think that kind of the few general comments I make, and then I'll go through some specifics. I think that the 2NR tried to go for like too many link arguments. There's a couple of these things that I could maybe kind of add a little bit to and figure out how to write a ballot, like just on this disorientation thing or something, but there were just so many things going on in the 2NR. There were some of them that just weren't super deep. I think your links to like the mechanism of the AF and like the Arctic Council stuff are kind of meh. I don't really think that they're good descriptions of what the AF is doing. I think that the AF kind of exploits some ways in which they're arguably double turns with the way that you described your alt solvency about empowering indigenous direct action movements. And I think that there is a net benefit to the permutation of involving a multiplicity of strategies against colonialism. In terms of direct action alone, I think they would not solve the impacts to the AF, which you've conceded as being pretty big, and also accessing the sort of ethical terms of impact calculus that you raise in terms of these HFO spills are going to cause massive displacement of populations. That's why there's populations that have called for the IMO to ban those things now. I get that you say that's kind of tokenism, but they say you're also kind of tokenism because you just point to one indigenous group that says we want direct action, and they then say therefore that's the only thing we should do. And I think that your link cards that are about like inviting indigenous groups to the Arctic Council and being like, welcome and come have our conversation is not exactly the same thing as an indigenous group said, please ban this, and then the AF is like, all right, we'll ban this. In terms of the sort of first thing I thought about is this like strong versus weak ontology thing. And I just don't have, I can't really fully articulate the conclusion that I think the 2NR wants from this. I guess what you're trying to say is like, if we think that colonialism operates contingently, we can never solve it. And so only the neg says like, we have this absolute strong ontology and the AF has a weak one. And I guess I get the like distinction that you've pointed out, that they've said that there are some contingent instances and you've said like, no contingent instances. But I think that the AF kind of says like, well, what are some of the differences then? Like when your alt says, here are these like different forms of action that occur, the Zapatistas have done this, there's this idle no more stuff, not all these things are like exactly the same. What is the, obviously you probably think that these are like different terms, like, okay, they're the same, but they all operate within the same strong ontology or something like that. But I didn't really think that I understood the 2NR conclusion for why we couldn't address coloniality if we tried to do like multiple things. The app was like, we can do direct action, and we can also say that we should ban HFOs. I just didn't follow your conclusion for why that meant that the direct action part of your alt would fail. So if you say it solves, then it seems like the perm would also solve it. I think that your reformism links were largely cards that were like reformism alone fails, not that reformism is like always bad. It's sort of, you had this card, you kind of framed it as like setting the terms of what's legitimate, and you're like, you try and say that like the alt isn't legitimate, and these forms of political action aren't legitimate. Only USFG politics is legitimate. But the AF never said that. They said perm. They're all legitimate. We should do both. The Arctic Council link I already kind of talked about. And then you had kind of like a sentence of eco-crisis link where you were like, eco-crisis disavows the history of settlerism as an ecological crisis itself. And that was kind of all I had, and I wasn't totally sure why that was the reason the perm didn't solve. And then there was this like orientation, disorientation thing, and again, it was just kind of like, there's so many things going on in the 2NR, the only thing I had written down is, only the alt can solve, it forces disorientation. And I think like, I sort of maybe understood, there's a world where you kind of say like, the permutation is an attempt to create an orientation for settlers, where we like find a part of the movement that makes sense for us and that's bad for us to do, we should only be disoriented, or something like that. But none of that like subsequent stuff I thought was anything that the 2NR really explained for me. So I just kind of thought, you didn't really have a great link to the plan mechanism. It seemed like it would probably be a good idea to ban HFOs in the Arctic. That didn't seem inconsistent with also saying that we should do direct action and endorse indigenous movements doing that as well. It seemed like having multiple strategies was more likely to solve stuff than just the alt.
Just briefly, because it's the last thing you said, the disorientation thing in terms of the perm, I think that's the tokenism, like we can latch on to one indigenous demand, then avow ourselves as settlers. And I hear you that they tried to spin it against us, but I felt that was completely new in the 2AR.
Oh, it's definitely in the 1AR too. I thought you dropped it.
That empowerment is...
Yeah, the 1AR on the perm definitely says that this arg links as much to you because you pick out groups that say direct action is good and then say therefore we should only do direct action. I certainly have the 1AR making that argument. I didn't think you answered it. Yeah.
I agree with a good bit of that. Maybe a few places. Like the simple version of mine is that I thought the permutation offered a kind of pseudo-ethical, mostly ethical way of critiquing the settler state that simultaneously recognized the necessity for partial strategies targeting institutions antagonistically from within. I thought that was kind of the spin they were making on the perms, which is sort of like, you were like weak ontology bad. They were like, there's a difference between having a weak ontology and an antagonistic political strategy. We can be like super antagonistic to the settler state, but we need to kind of think about the complexity of ontological structures, which to me cut back a little bit against the like super strong ethical argument that you were winning, because they can engage with the ethical demand, but also think about the necessity for operating, I guess, on like different planes. I thought that solved a big impact, like Stephen said, because I just don't think there's a lot of defense to it. I agree also, like I agree that there is some kind of like settlerism makes some land violence inevitable, but I just thought it was so like under-explained here that I would, like it would have been almost impossible for me to look at them and tell them why politics that ends like black carbon emissions in the Arctic would inevitably happen inside of like settlerism and absent just like literally the AF not doing anything. And then I thought that the combination of the alternative would cut back a little bit against some of the bigger kind of like grand system-wide impacts. I guess I agree with Stephen a little bit that like there were too many links, but I guess I thought the bigger problem was that there were a lot of impacts and few links that were specific to the AF's kind of mechanism or the specific kind of politics that the AF was engaged in. So I didn't think that imagining the AF policy thing was as bad as it might have been. And part of that is just like, I thought a lot of your examples for like circumvention, how circumvention might operate, your examples of like why the Arctic Council might be bad, just didn't make that much sense in a world where the AF was like, seriously, the government should just not allow any of these people to be up in the Arctic, because it didn't seem like the same kind of like land acquisition, grab, control, etc. that some of your other links seem to be presuming. And then I guess I thought that the thing that's maybe a little like wasn't in Stephen's decision that I thought was important is I kind of thought that a winning team in this debate needed a strategy that had a good chance of resolving settler colonialism, and I actually thought that there wasn't a lot of risk that these blockade movements could really solve the specific politics of the affirmative or settler colonialism more broadly. So I agree with you that there is some chance that like in Canada they're working to blockade the trains, but I thought their evidence was pretty good at the next level of that, which is that if those movements spilled outwards, they would be repressed pretty heavily by the system, and that the only way to kind of make the long-term transformation of settlerism possible is by kind of working simultaneously in both sites, because then you can like diffuse some of that reaction or whatever. So I guess the simple way of saying is I don't think you have a very good chance of resolving settler colonialism. I agree with Stephen that this disorientation stuff was kind of like interesting. And I think I'm tempted to say that a 2NR that had spent most of the time on framework had impacted out more why these weak ontology arguments and these ethic arguments matter here, and it focused more on why disorientation is kind of the only strategy that we as people in this room should have, and just kind of why it's totally irrelevant to talk about like the AF. So basically a lot more of the framework debate might have gotten my ballot, but I don't know, in this version it didn't.
Can I ask about what you thought of the framework debate that was in the 2NR?
Yeah, well, okay, so like you say that they mishandled the framework debate because it's impossible to have a negative ballot and an ethical way of like engaging with the settler subject, that the debate is about teaching, and the only thing that emerges from this debate is certain kinds of the generation of knowledge that allows us to engage the world in an ethical way. I just didn't think that they dropped that, at least in the way that you seem to be saying. I thought their argument was pretty consistent that there are multiple kinds of knowledge that we can generate in this debate, and one of those kinds of knowledge is a kind of engaged institutional practice, and that kind of like analysis of consequences is in itself a kind of useful and ethical way of relating to the world. So I guess I maybe just disagree with some of this 2NR framing that they just like didn't have an ethical way of thinking about themselves. And I also thought that the permutation kind of, I don't know, I guess it contextualized a little bit how that knowledge production might spill outwards, that we can simultaneously produce two kinds of specific knowledge and two kinds of knowledge, both of which might be useful. Whether they're ethical kind of begged the question of the rest of the debate, because I had to think about like, can any of these things resolve settler colonialism? Are reforms possible, et cetera, et cetera. So some of the things I already talked about became reasons why I didn't think they had a fundamentally unethical position towards the world.
Okay, I want to ask about the link argument that I think Stephen characterized as, so you characterized it as like AF attempts to limit the debate, which is colonizing political reality, but doesn't apply because they made a perm and said that we should engage in dual strategies. The way I thought I was phrasing and framing this in the 2NR is that their assumption of the inevitability of the sovereign institution, of our role as policymakers and scenario planners, itself locks in like colonial understanding of our subject, means that we can't disorient, we can't destabilize our way of knowing or way of acting. And I think the specific impact to that I have is like the sort of like erasure of spiritual, cultural ways of knowing. Like we colonize political reality by saying this world that exists of political institutions is the world. All we can do is make adjustments within it. Therefore, there is no possibility of working with an indigenous movement on legitimate terms, just in the reductionist terms of tokenist inclusion or whatever, because it doesn't recognize the sovereignty contestation that's at the heart of that
Yeah, I think I kind of disagree with your initial premise / framing of the AF as having said that this is the world. I think that the entire premise of their claim
the
about
inevitability claims, no?
I think that it's a little bit different than the way that you're characterizing it. They're not saying like literally this will always exist forever and we can never do anything about it. Their whole argument about contingency and finding particular solutions to it is like, all right, this structure is mutable in various different ways. We need to be sort of strategic in the interim about how we engage these institutions as they exist now while simultaneously engaging in this process. And I don't think that the affirmative argument is the same as saying like, yes, this structure is inevitable and immutable throughout history and will always be this way no matter what happens, but they are saying that like in the immediate reaction to HFO spills in the Arctic, it does exist. Can we both simultaneously find a tactical way of engaging with it while also supporting indigenous ways of engagement? And so I thought the connection that you're trying to draw now in explaining that vis-a-vis the disorientation argument is something that I didn't really think that I had the two and R doing, and which was part of my sort of concern about there just kind of like was like A, B, C, D, E, all these different like quick link arguments, and I thought maybe picking one or two of them and connecting them so that I understood, all right, here's the link argument, and here's how this link argument relates to our alternative solvency, and here's how that relates to the permutation, and kind of having one train that connects all of those three levels rather than like, here's a bunch of stuff on links, here's some stuff on the alt, and then I'm kind of left piecing together how these things work. And I think that just leaves too much room for the AF to kind of like recharacterize the perm in ways that you probably don't want.
I also don't think you want to phrase this in terms of it's inevitable, etc. My reading of that card is it's talking about, and this is why my problem with the perm is that it's talking about liberal reformism. Yeah. It's not that it's inevitable, it's that trying to solve problems in this way. And I understood the disorientation as breaking out of this way. So it's not that it's inevitable, it's that this approach to problem solving makes this a persistent problem. That their approach to problem solving locks in the kinds of problems that you're talking about and has the ethical problems that you're talking about. Now, just I think making this a movements argument and talking about the Arctic Council, etc., as separate links hurts you. You would be a lot stronger saying what we're describing with the Arctic Council is symptomatic of the reformism that we've indicted and just an illustration of it, not a separate link, and that objections, are talking about tribal protest, etc., isn't that this is the solution to the world, but that it's this kind of rejection and destabilization that breaks us out of reformism. And again, if somebody said, why is reformism inherently this way, like that first card, making these assumptions of indigeneity, and I have no idea. It is ontological. The card talks about this is just the way we are when we're doing this kind of thing, but it makes no sense that reformism of all kinds fits into this. And so that's probably why they're having trouble with that taking out the perm.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess the way that I would characterize it, to some extent, I thought it was like, if you say the state is inevitable, it's inevitable. It's kind of like a tautological argument. And I agree with Stephen's characterization. It's not like they said the state is inevitable, and that's why I thought these kind of like, we can be antagonistic, but also kind of pluriversal. And that's why I thought they were kind of cross-X/2AR, whatever rereading of your alternative evidence was kind of valuable, because they were like, look, if it's true that all of these like multi-sided struggles in different places that have radically different demands are all kind of examples of the politics that you might talk about, then it makes sense that we need to kind of fight at different levels. I thought the last thing was kind of like, the impact to a lot of these arguments was that you can't work well with native folks, but that kind of begged the question of whether those native folks' struggles were going to be successful anyways. And so if I thought that they were winning a chance that like the blockade movement was probably insufficient or not particularly successful, then the impact to not being able to work well with them wasn't as large as it could have been.
Okay.
Your soft ontology argument, I'm understanding this as we can take this ontological position and see if it works. So that we could endorse their we could take the ontological position that they're objecting to as a contingent and be pragmatic and see if it works. Am I understanding that argument correctly?
Reasonably so,
Huh?
yeah.
Okay. Okay. So it's not we can consider all sorts of different alternatives.
Correct.
It's that we can, okay. Okay. No, I don't think that's what you want to say for, given that first card.
That's fair.
Again, I think the position would have been a lot stronger without the second link, and the alt should be framed more abstractly, maybe illustrated by the protests, but not that the protests are going to solve everything. I think that obviously gets in your way in this debate, both instances.
Yeah, excellent debate. Good turn.
Yep. Thank you.